Welcome. There's only one thing that matters in spirituality, one thing only, and that is to recognize what you are, to recognize what this is that's occurring here. You can either recognize what this is or not recognize what this is. That's the only thing that actually matters. And that's the only goal that is achievable and worth achieving in spirituality. Ordinarily, people relate to their experience in terms of their interpretation of events that seem to be occurring within it. Relating to it in terms of environments, in terms of entities, in terms of material objects, in terms of cause and effect, in terms of space and time. In short, the normal sort of chain of events that most humans seem to be thinking is they're involved in and invested in, and constitutes their environment and their field of activities. This is a big error. This is a big mistake, because in actuality, all of that's completely irrelevant. And relating to that can potentially blind one to noticing what this actually is. It's very analogous to a dream. When you're lost in a dream, you're not aware of it as a dream. You're aware of it as you seem to be in there. You seem to be in an environment. There seem to be objects around you. You seem to be relating to these objects. You seem to have goals you're pursuing or things you're trying to avoid or what have you. All of which completely distracts you from the one essential fact about a dream is that it's a dream. None of those things that you're relating to are actually there. There's no environment in a dream. There's an apparent environment. There may be apparent events. There may be apparent entities. You may be inhabiting an apparent body in a dream. Nothing's there. It's a dream. There's nothing there but dream. And yet, if you're relating to the dream in terms of all of these supposed conditions that you are supposing constitutes an actual environment, you're liable to be completely distracted from the one fact that is essential, which is that it's a dream. And exactly likewise, this condition here is very clear what it is, and it's not in any way concealed or not in any way not obvious what it is, but what it is subtle. And so if you're distracted by gross interpretations, if you're distracted by investment in the whole soap opera of normal human life and success and failure and so on and so forth, you're liable to miss this subtle fact that is the only important fact that is constantly in evidence, constantly available, clearly being displayed every instant. And noticing this condition is the only thing that actually matters. In different traditions, it's called self-realization. It's called realization of the Atman. It's called God realization. And all of these various designations have value. But the fact itself is the fact itself, and it completely is irrespective of how you refer to it, how you designate it. It's simply no more, no less than recognizing what this is. This here, your field of experience, that is, right here, right now, completely in evidence. Nothing else whatsoever in evidence. Just seeing the field of experience as the prime fact. And all these semi-factoids of environments and objects and history and entities and bodies and all these things are only abstractions, extrapolations, hypothetical interpretations that can only exist within and are apparently justified by this one primal fact of the actual existence of the field of your experience. But the field of your experience is not the sum of its parts. It's not the sum of all of environments and objects and beings and things and bodies. On the contrary, the field of experience is something entirely beyond, entirely transcending all of these supposed elaborations that we're very used to relating to on the human scale of analysis. And what it is very, very simple and very clear to see, but it's so radically other than, it's so radically different from anything that humans normally qualify and relate to as an object that it may seem very strange if you are straitjacketed and unable to rise above a level of human analysis, a level of sort of logical human thinking within human logic that will constrain you from noticing the incredible subtlety and slipperiness of this actual condition. In terms of, okay, great, so what? How to do it? What do you do? It's really quite simple. Since the thing that typically is our challenge is our addiction to relating to objects and things that we can define within our minds, within analysis, simply go to some portion of your experience that is not particularly defined and hang out there, see what's there. And this is very easy to find because most of our experience is actually like that. For example, you can close your eyes and just watch what's in your field, what's appearing in your field of vision when your eyes close. Well, there's no names for it. I mean, you might come up with a few feeble names like, oh, it's residual activity in the retina or something, but that's very, it doesn't have much power. It's not something that you're going to be talking about, heatedly with your friends at a party. It's something that is relatively, it's not part of the normal human discourse. It's not part of something that we relate to as a thing. And yet, it's when your eyes are closed, you're experiencing a full field of vision every bit as much as you are when your eyes are open. And yet when your eyes are open, we could sit and talk for hours about what you're seeming to see, right? Because the human realm of discourse has developed specifically to deal with that level of analysis. But in this subtlety, what can you say? Well, it's subtle little sort of flickerings of light, but they aren't really flickerings, and they kind of form patterns, but they aren't really patterns, and it's kind of this and not really that, and it kind of gets real squishy. But the fact itself is not. The fact itself is very specific. It's actual. It's not at all vague. It's very precisely what it is, even though from a point of view of human analysis it seems vague, it seems imprecise. But that's because human thought is not equipped to deal with subtlety. And again, if you go looking around within your experience otherwise, you'll find vast areas that are unqualifiable. Deep sleep. What happens? What are you experiencing when you're in deep sleep? Your experience is just as full when you're in deep sleep as it is right now, right? But what can you say about what it was you experienced in deep sleep? You go, well, I was asleep. or experience the space that your experience is happening in. Like, for example, we're all very familiar of these pictures of the Earth taken from the moon and the early astronauts. There's this little blue-green sphere floating in nothingness, and wow, that's cool. Right now, your experience, what is it floating in? Here's your field of vision right here. Okay, here's your field of vision. It's sort of a rough, sideways, fuzzy-edged oval that you're experiencing right now. Where is it? What's it in? What's it sitting in? What's its context? It's interesting. It's not nothing in any simple sense, but it's not anything you can talk about or put a handle on. You go to your thoughts. So your thoughts are happening. Here's your sphere of thinking, wherever it is, right? Even if it's aware, whatever it is. It's like, okay, good. What's that happening in? Where's that happening? What's it in? And if you look closely, you may discover that your field of experience is not unlike a sort of a not particularly spherical sphere of all sorts of experiential qualities, and your fields of your senses and thought and various other subtle experiences, and it's all basically sitting in a vast nothingness, and yet you're there too. There's no boundary, there's no wall that's constraining you, that's holding you into a particular locus. It's just there's an area of greater density of experiential event around the nexus of your senses then. But and that sort of peters out. Like if you look at follow your field of vision towards the edges, it sort of gets fuzzy and grayer and sort of less and less eventful. But it never really hits a cutoff point. It never falls off a cliff. You never get to a point where there's an edge that you hit, where it stops and there's nothing beyond. And you are there just as much as you are in the center of your field of vision, where it's all sharpened and focused. Right? You're the fuzzy bits. You're there just as much as you are here, no more, no less. And if you push even farther, just with your field of vision, look farther and farther to the edge, you can just keep on going. Eventually, it stops looking like vision, but it never stops. You never stop. But it gets to a point where it's pretty weird in human terms, and it might seem boring or disorienting because it's like, what is it? You can't relate to it in human terms. But that's the point. You're not actually a human being. And as long as you insist on relating to what you are in human terms, you are anchoring yourself to a weight of delusion, to a weight of error, to a weight of inaccuracy, needlessly. Because what you are is completely beyond the human scale of analysis, human scale of describability. And since you already are that, you can discover that you are that by letting yourself become more explicitly familiar with your experience, which is and has always been occurring in these subtler dimensions or realms or what have you. So that's my spiel. Yeah.
I hesitate to bring this up, but it is weighing on me. I'm not asking for anybody to tell me what to do, but I'm trying to work skillfully and wisely with these apparent options. I would love to get your input. I'm on social security disability for depression.
Mm-hmm.
Ellie Eisenberg has been to see you several times. Two old friends of mine knew him years ago, and they don't know each other, but they both, in the late 90s, recommended that I talk to him and see if I would be eligible for disability. People have told me years before that I should do that. I always thought, no, I can work. And I got playing the night watchman for a number of years. I gravitated toward that type of job because it was quiet. Nobody was bothering me. I've been on this disability program since September of '99.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, I was in retreat at a Theravada center. I was doing very well. I was very happy to be there, but the teachers that were there, I wasn't doing formal vipassana. I was doing my own blend of sort of template, Dzogchen, and body, my own practice. They said that's very nice, but we really can't offer good support, so they only gave me 9 months, and then I went to Rajapani, which is the Buddhist center in Thunder Creek, and they doubled their cabin rate, and that was the end of my retreat. I went back to where I was at before, and things fell apart very quickly. I did very well in verified settings, but anyway, for the past year and a half, I've been moving forward. But I still, in my heart, feel that retreat would be a good thing. In November last year, I went up to Temple Selene, and I had a half-hour private meeting about a parchment. And I asked the person, do you think it would be good for me to be in retreat? And he said, yes. I just spoke from Parsha Rinpoche, which he translated by Timothy Norbu, who was his teacher, says, hide body and stay in a solitary place. quiet speech and disengage from conversation. Quiet mind and only watch your own faults. Therefore be called a hidden yogi. He thought that was just great, so I said, well, is there any possibility I could do it on the property here? He said, well, I don't make those decisions. Talk to Lama Sonnen. Lama Sonnen is the second in command of Mr. Shafir. I'm also Tibetan. So about a week later, I had a meeting with him, and he asked me a little bit about my thought, and I said, I'm on disability for depression, and he said, oh, that's not good. You may have to pay back in your next life. You're living off of taxpayers, and you may have to pay back in your next life. And as far as doing retreat, no, you need to work with your circumstances, and remember that everything comes from causes. You want better conditions, you have to generate the causes. It was a very different type of response than I evidently received from Mama Catherine. It was all very confusing. Right now, I feel very connected with what you're communicating. It seems to be helping me. And at the where I live, I can't stay there. My apartment is really uninhabitable. It has mold that I can't prove. Mama Sonnen said that might be my karma, whatever. So right now, I don't know whether to just maybe buy a van and come up from North Bay so that I can spend more time with your Sangha, or go to another Tibetan center that did say they would take me on a trial basis in New York. It's also a Dzogchen Padma Samyam, the temple brothers. Only one remaining there, your physical brother in the name of the tradition. Mama Sonnen didn't elaborate. I mean, from that point of view, would I be better off getting off disability and just working a regular job and trying my best to practice?
Well, I mean, this is where skill comes into it. You have to try to assess, and not necessarily rationally assess, but intuitively assess what situation will be most optimal for you, with the least amount of disturbance, with the least amount of compromise in terms of what is valuable to you. So I wouldn't worry, if I were you, I wouldn't worry myself with concerns of karmic debt and such, because that will all no doubt take care of itself, and you needn't devote a lot of thought to it. But if, for example, you know that a situation of relative, minimal social involvement is beneficial, then by all means do your best, by hook or by crook, to try to find a way to arrange a situation that will provide that. But I mean, ultimately, you are invested in your karma, so to speak. In other words, your life is the pattern that seems to be occurring, such as it is, and you do need to. That sort of displays the resources that you have to deal with, but not all the resources. In other words, just because your life looks a certain way doesn't mean it's constrained in any way. There may be hidden possibilities that could flower in an instant, and just because they haven't flowered previously doesn't mean they can't flower. You see what I mean? In other words, karma is not a constraint. Karma is just a sort of a convenient reference point of what seems to be happening, very loosely speaking, and operative where there's very, but it does not define what is possible. I don't know if that's very helpful to you.
It's the difference, I guess, the friction is with seeming conflicting info. Ramakarjan clearly, he was quite care, and it actually seemed very
Well, he would be.
happy that I had the intention, that I have the intention, that I communicated the intention to him to be in retreat. And I thought it would be a feeling up at the temple of Selene. Mama son and said, oh, you don't have room, and he did not seem...
Well, different standards. You know, you can't, when you get advice from people, you have to, just because a person is giving you advice doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. You have to weigh it yourself. And if you get advice from 30 different people, you'll get 30 different, more or less divergent bits of advice. So you have to, you know, the buck really stops with you. You have to follow your truth and you know, claim the authority of your knowledge of what you most highly value, and then orient to that as efficiently as you can in terms of how you can deal with your circumstances.
See, what the thought process that occurs, I think, I know the people who, I don't know them personally, but I know the standards, the people who do retreat up at Temple of Selene, like they have a 3-year retreat, and other people have done their nundro, and they've received empowerment, you know, the whole program. Now, I haven't done any of that. I've done my own little efforts, but so, I mean, who am I to be, you know, how pretentious to be entertaining the notion of retreat? But then again,
Nonsense. Who aren't you? Buddha didn't do nundra. All these people are playing all these games, claiming that it's the right thing to do, and it may or may not be. But the claim doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
You know, there is no prerequisite whatsoever for realization. Realization is always available now, here and now. There's nothing that needs to be. There's no path or steps or anything that needs to have been accomplished first in order to qualify for realization. Realization is nothing other than directly seeing this as it is. On the contrary, extricating ourselves from all of this all of this, you know, apparently important prerequisites is the prerequisite. And the extrication can come by simple rejection. You know, by saying, hey, screw all this stuff. You know, screw your rules, screw your red tape, screw your hot air. This is reality. I am real. And simply seeing that fact is the absolute peak of realization.
Peter, when I mentioned to Mama Sonnen that I said something about realizing the true nature of life, he said, stop BSing. Don't talk that way. It was very, Mama Sonnen was real straight shooter. All business. I drove Friday of Ripple Shade. And I walked out there feeling really close. So,
well, what a nice guy. He did you a big favor.
Maybe that's what I deserve. That's my
well, if you accept it, then you deserve it. If you can't summon the authority to reject it and say, well, that's your point of view, and I understand that point of view because it's shared by vast numbers of people, maybe even the majority of people, but that doesn't make it accurate. That's the very essence of delusion. The very essence of delusion is that there is process, that there is entrapment, that there is structure. All of these things are the very essence of delusion, and relating to your reality in those terms is just reinforcing delusion. You know, I mean, think of a dream. When you're in a dream and you go to someone in your dream for advice as to how to deal with the dream, they're going to give you a lot of stuff about in relation to the context of what seems to be happening in the dream. They're not going to say, it's just a dream, it doesn't matter. Fuck all this stuff. Screw all these people, screw this environment. Just look and see that it's a dream, and they're nothing but a pack of cards. You're the only real being here. You're the only real being in your life. Everything else is innuendo, and to give it authority, to give your authority away to these other supposed entities is complete delusion. It's projection. You are the very nature of reality. You are it, and there is nothing other than the it that you are in your universe. And everything that shows up because of you. If you were here, your experience wouldn't be here, and everything that appears within your experience wouldn't be here.
I said to this guy, I said, look, I have an income, it's a meager income, but it keeps me going. And I said, I'll pay whatever out of that, and I'll live on rice and beans, and just let me stay in a tent. I just want to practice, hitting yogi. And he said, no, we can't do that. Lama Tarshan was very overjoyed that I had that wish.
Well, there may be a message there. I mean, we look at what Lama Tarshan said and look at what this other guy says. Who are you going to listen to?
I didn't want to get into with Lama Sonim, this Rinpoche said, I didn't even bring up what Lama Tarshan had said, at least not very much.
Yeah. Well, you don't need to, but you don't need to disprove him. You don't need to argue with him, but if he has the authority over that situation, then you're out of luck. And that's okay, but then you can just cross it off, but explore other options. See if you have any other friends that would mind if you set up a tent in their backwoods or whatever, or explore the possibilities of having a camper, explore this and that possible alternative. But you don't need to try to plug yourself into a system that is rejecting you or insisting you play by some very arbitrary set of rules that is their norm.
The thing I absolutely love that place. I feel very sort of at home there, and I'm thinking of not asking to be a retreat, but being on staff. They don't even have to pay me because I have an income. I can even pay them rent.
Yeah, try that. But again, if they are running within the superstructure of rules, a superstructure of gamesmanship of certain ways you're supposed to be behaving, you may find yourself being seduced into that, or at least having to pay some degree of lip service to it, or dodging it or whatever. And if that's not a problem for you or an issue for you, then sure, that's a possibility. There's all sorts of possibilities. Sneak in the back and set up a tent when no one's looking, and they won't even know you're there, right? I mean, the way to pursue realization is any way you can. Lie, cheat, and steal. Doesn't matter. Just go for it. Because there is no process involved. There is no approval involved. There's no outside authority you need to go to, And yet, if you go to outside authority, you'll get 1,000 different authoritative, recommendations, which will be at various degrees of baroquely absurd, or baroquely obligating, and you basically end up buying into game structures, which is in actual fact not necessary. Now, granted, these people aren't necessarily malicious. They might not know it's not necessary. They may think that they may have the best of intentions and think all these elaborate game structures are necessary. But I can tell you, and this does no good for you. You have to say it, but I can tell you authoritatively, from my point of view, that's a crock. There is absolutely no prerequisite for realization. Simply directly seeing what this is and has always been, what you are and have always been, is it. And there's nothing that needs to be fulfilled, no behaviors that need to have been met or not, no moral standards that need to be maintained or not. All of that is just a distraction. It's fine. It's as far as it goes. If you want to be a good person and succeed and deal with situations, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But it has absolutely nothing to do with realization. It's irrelevant, entirely irrelevant one way or the other. I mean, Buddha didn't get realization because he was following other people's advice. You know, Christ wasn't following other people's advice when he went out and did all his stuff. He was, you know, he basically said, fuck you, to the establishment. He says, you're wrong, fuck you. You know, this is the truth, and I'm standing up for it. And, you know.
Well, Lama Harshan communicated to me was not really significantly different from what you have today.
Well, in the face of two such glowing, supportive invitations to nakedly being what you already are, why seek other advice?
Mark Twain said something like, most people arrive at their opinions secondhand and without any reflection. It seems pretty true. Like, a lot of people love to give advice, and people also love to take
Sure. Well, it's the whole part of the whole human milieu of interaction.
Yeah.
You know, humans are very concerned with conformity. We essentially seem to be biased to be tribal creatures, so we're very concerned at fitting into our tribe unconsciously. We're very concerned at more or less being like the people around us, or at least having some people around us that we can feel we're more or less like, so we feel like we have a tribe and all that.
Yeah, it's in all realms, like not just obviously spirituality, but like mundane things, like if you say in polite company, like, I don't eat breakfast, it'll just piss a lot of people off, because there's a deeply held belief that it's the most important meal of the day. It's like they've all bought into it.
You say anything, you're going to piss a certain percentage of the people off.
Yeah.
And you say it's opposite, you're going to piss the other people off. All I have to do is show up and I piss her off. Don't even have to open my mouth.
But it's like easier in a way just to go along.
It is, and this line of least resistance is what energizes and perpetuates samsara, what energizes and perpetuates delusion. Because there's not many role models for realization. Most of the role models are for conformity. You look around and what are you being fed? What's the media feeding you? What's the, you know, it's all this sort of various, you know, what's easy is to be a human being interacting with other human beings, being involved in this whole soap opera, getting all worked up about it and pretending that it matters.
Yeah.
And even if you're more inquisitive and go into sciences or astronomy or something like that, or something even more speculative, then there'll still be some degree of establishment there.
Yeah. And we went to the
even spirituality, if you're a more radical, edgy, spiritual person, and you start hanging out with people that are like that, you can piss them off too.
Yeah.
They'll say, no, that's not how it is, it's like this.
We went to the Folsom Street Festival on Sunday, and it's like, even there, it's like people are being radical in a way, and it's all according to like just a different schema that they've all.
Yeah, I mean, this is the human mode. It's one of participation, of mimicry, tribalism. You know, it's very, very rare to notice people that are completely individual, completely, self-empowered.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean rejecting being like other people, deliberately making yourself different from everybody.
Yeah.
You don't need to, you already are. But it's just not orienting that way, whether or not you happen to be. Not giving a shit.
Peter, it's not just the tribal. For me, the value, the draw of Tamil Salim, Sangha, Dharma, Sangha energy, the like here, it's inspiring.
Yeah, but that energy ultimately comes from the impersonal, or let's say the non-human. And even if there seems to be a group of humans who are resonating to that or respecting that to some degree or other, they are not essential. They are downstream from the primal fact, which is the radiance, what I call radiant presence, which is the central fact of spirituality and the important fact. The being of the actuality of divine being, which happens to be the very core of everything, happens to be the very core of you, happens to be the very core of your entire universe. And that fact is the important fact. And whether or not there are other people that are resonating to some approximation of that, even very profoundly, is more ephemeral than essential. I understand it can be supportive and all that, but ultimately it's not. Ultimately, that in itself, that is also a crutch. That is also a distraction. Ultimately, you stand alone because you are alone. You are the radiant presence, and the radiant presence is alone, completely alone in infinity. Literal fact. Right here, right now, and always. That is the fact. And seeing that fact is the important discovery.
In terms of, because I don't have a job, I don't have a family, and that's just a relative situation.
Yeah.
In terms of feeling, like what I have left of my life, like giving something to Sangha, in addition to making whatever effort I can to realize the truth.
Uh-huh.
At a Dharma center, I wouldn't just be a person who's bored of the state. I would actually have something to do with useful. I try and do.
Yeah, but usefulness and all of that is really spin doctoring. Nothing is ultimately useful and nothing is ultimately useless. All activity is just activity. And all activity is participating in the entire stream of all event. I mean, ants are just as useful as stray cats are, which is just as useful as government officials are, maybe more so. Which is just as useful as bums are, which is just as useful as, people who are, volunteers who go out and give 24 hours a day helping other people. There's no better or worse. There's no more or less useful. It's all participating in a completely transcendental, fathomless dance of energy, and there's no way of actually qualifying it as good or bad, useful or useless.
Let's say maybe one way of framing aiming qualifications, that which points to that fact, that which is pointing to the truth of it being illusory,
right,
rather than, let's say, perpetuating, reifying the sense of that illusion.
Right. Okay. Good. And a good sacrament of that might be violating your own standards. If your desire to be helpful, deliberately don't be helpful. If you desire to participate, deliberately don't participate. Break your own rules as a way of honoring the profundity of reality. I mean, I'm not urging you to do that. I'm just suggesting that is an alternative and equally justifiable and ultimately admirable approach.
Well, one of the things that I'm noticing more and more vividly, this mind is full of ideas about spirituality. I've read a lot, I've been to different centers and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when I've heard those teachings and have not been really in a place where they could sink in, it's just like an accumulation of stuff in the mind.
Yeah.
Now what's starting to arise is like, I don't care about that. What is actually real? What is actually going on here? Don't tell me more about
Good.
or Vajrayana.
Good.
What is really...
Good, yeah. Ignore the teachings and just go to reality itself. Reality does not depend upon teaching. And teachings don't, in fact, indicate reality any more accurately than anything else does. I mean, you want to see reality, that's reality right there. There's no teaching superior to that. Absolutely none. That is the height of it. And that's already a given. The fact that you're sitting here is that. What we think and what we say and our trying to figure things out and all that is hogwash. It's irrelevant.
Warm it up. Okay.
And cutting to that stance as directly as possible is the most efficient way to realization. As long as there's intermediary conditions that need to be fulfilled, it's just an endless spiral. I mean, that is the very energy that makes the wheel of samsara go around. And you drop everything, let go of everything, without needing to reject it. Just ignore it, and just know this. Bang, that right there. That's it. Nothing doesn't. There's nothing around that. There's nothing that needs to support that. It's already given. It's already completely actual, completely, totally, clearly displayed. No structure that needs to be manifested in first, and no structure that needs to be removed first. Structure is irrelevant. The important fact is the fact, and the fact is the fact, which is already the fact. So it's already the case. It doesn't need support or, there's no road that needs to be built to the fact. The fact is the fact, and this is the fact.
It almost seems like at some level the mind can't accept that.
Yeah, screw the mind. The mind can't realize anyway. The mind is a hindrance. I mean, it's not a hindrance in that you need to shut it down. Just ignore it. You bypass it. The mind is like a pet monkey that you have that trails around, and its antics may or may not be amusing or annoying, but they don't have anything to do with anything. And it will just continue to cavort and cavort and cavort and cavort and cavort till one day it drops over dead. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't hinder anything. It's just irrelevant. Our personalities, our individuality as personality, as mind, as all that, are all complete irrelevancies. They're like the color of your skin, or the shade of your hair, or what your social status happens to be as a result of your history and all that. They're just accidents. They have no bearing on anything. They are what they are, but they're not important in themselves, in terms of realization. You are not a human being, and the part of you that is not a human being knows it's not a human being, and the human portions of you, the portions of you that could be described as being human, are irrelevant to that fact. So they're just unimportant. They're just not in that system. They're not a part of that exchange.
When you say, just as I come here to have it pointed out more energetically or whatever that dynamic that occurs in thought time, going to a monastery, going to a cave and remote areas of sun yogi abode. Ultimately, it is a crutch, but perhaps
Sure.
Sometimes it's necessary or...
Sure. Yeah. I mean, do whatever you think is helpful, by all means. But, ultimately, nothing is necessary. And whatever is genuinely helpful will be helpful because it leads you to that discovery that nothing is necessary, and even that which is helpful is not actually necessary. The point of any spiritual practice, any support, any spiritual engagement whatsoever, is to discover it's non-necessity. Discover its irrelevance. The point of view of mastering meditation is to discover you don't need to meditate. The point of view of coming to spiritual meeting and going to see teachers is to discover you don't need to do it. And when you have that discovery, having done it will have achieved its effect.
Right. But that will only happen when it happens.
Of course it happens when it happens, but it can happen any time because you don't need to go through it to discover that. You can discover that at any point. You can discover that even before you go. You can say, I don't need to do that. Do that. It's a load of bullshit. I mean, why come here to see me, to listen to me talk? I'm not... All I'm doing is throwing the ball back in your court. I'm saying, hey, you're real, and that's the important fact, and check that fact out, you know? And that fact is a fact completely beyond the dimensions of human analysis. And it's a trippy and amazing and astounding and entertaining and nourishing and incredibly profound fact. But it's already the case, whether or not I say it. It's even the case whether or not you know it.
There's a habit of having external authority verify and validate and all that stuff, and so it seems to be that that's the biggest hurdle, is just of acknowledging one's own direct experience of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately...
That's all it is, ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So within this sort of non-process process, I don't know what you call it. So there's notions of maturity, not mature.
Sure.
You know what you don't know it. Now and then there's, for me, what I studied for years was just how ignorant I was.
Sure.
When I look at all that, it seems like one giant ball of something. But that is probably, I'm just thinking, inquiring about it. All of that knowing, the not knowing, whether I'm mature or not, or, how do I get it, how do I understand it, or how would I reapply this and make this into something.
Mm-hmm.
All that just seems like, I don't know what that is, but I'm looking at that as, not just as bullshit, but as,
It glows.
close, as a field of something. What is that whole field? What is it? Is that opposed to? I mean, is it bullshit, non-bullshit?
Yeah, what is it?
Is it just, I don't know what it is either.
Yeah, but that's good. That's great. What is it? What is anything? What is maturity? What is immaturity? I mean, these are very good questions, and they have bottomless profundity. I mean, nothing is nothing. It's all something. But what is it? And maturity is what? What is maturity?
Even the interpretation of the ignorance.
All that.
I was labeling it as ignorance, but I don't know what that is.
No, exactly. But what is ignorance? What is maturity? What are these things? I mean, this is a very good question, because you're looking at reality itself. And all of these are symptoms or displays of reality itself, right? Maturity and immaturity, realization and unrealization.
Receptivity and non-receptivity.
Yeah, all these things occur within what context? Within the context of this actuality here, and the reality that they have is the reality of this that they appear in, and what they actually are is much, much, much more subtle than anything we can think about them or anything we can say about them. I mean, you could write a dissertation on maturity, and it would be shallow. Maturity itself is infinitely subtle, infinitely nuanced. Immaturity is infinitely subtle, infinitely nuanced. And in their actuality is where you find that subtlety, not in the analysis. And that's really the point, is to go to actuality. And in actuality, maturity and immaturity just become irrelevant. They become modes of this actuality. And the actuality is all that matters, not what we think about it or say about it or how we're gauging we're doing in terms of dealing with it in some progressive way or whatever. All that's just irrelevant. What's astounding is what this is, and you already are what this is. You always have been. You always will be. That's the astounding fact. And then interesting sort of symptoms like your relative maturity, your relative getting it or not getting it, or your relative head being in the clouds, or being really, engaged and wide open, is all just phenomena of this astoundingness that you are. And that's the interesting thing, not what it happens to look like. I mean, it's strangely paradoxical that until you get to be more mature, you don't develop a subtlety to begin to appreciate these amazing things. But these things are amazing even before you're mature and develop the subtlety to appreciate them. So being mature and being able to appreciate them isn't actually superior. It just means you get to sit back and look at it and go, wow, this is some cool stuff.
Yeah, what looks like instructions is not. It's not that.
Yeah.
It's something. You know what it is.
Yeah. And that's really, that's always the interesting engagement is, what is this? What is this? And then and obviously, there's no answer to that question. But just in the answerlessness is this wonderful actuality, this bottomless actuality that all this is, and that's where the revelation is. In what is this? What is? I mean, you can ask that about anything whatsoever, and you're gone. If you really follow it, you just, what is this?
Yeah, it seems like the ignorance, because I was studying that for some years. I got off the spiritual. I was looking at how much ignorance there is from even myself, and it's sort of going out for, say, about 100,000 miles in every direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is actually... No, I don't know what to say. It's just sort of like that is... I think I was holding an interpretation on that, too. So
ignorance is very, very subtle.
It's not what I think it is.
No, exactly. Ignorance is very, very subtle. Ignorance is... ignorance is like clouds in the sky. You have a blue sky and there's no clouds, and then wisps of clouds begin to come in, and then they develop and they develop and they develop, and eventually you have a storm front, right? And so the storm front could be said to be mature, and the little wisps of clouds are ignorant. They're immature. They're undeveloped. They haven't flowered. They haven't bloomed. Or you see a small child or a puppy or something. It's ignorant. It's innocent. It hasn't come to fruition. Or you see a sapling. You go into the forest, and the redwood forest, and you see this little tiny redwood coming up, and you go, "Wasn't that cute?" And what that is exactly the same thing as what this massive, incredible life form next to it is. That's mature, but it's not. It's in a different state of its unfoldment. So ultimately, ignorance, and I mean, in a spiritual sense, ignorance and let's call it wisdom or maturity, or immaturity and maturity, are just arbitrary snapshots of a continuum, of a process. And the process is what's important, not what stage it happens to look like at a given time. I mean, wisdom, let's call it arbitrarily wisdom, what leads to wisdom is ignorance. What leads to maturity is immaturity. What leads to the wisdom and intelligence of old age is the stupidity of youth. So the stupidity of youth is the wisdom of old age, just in a different stage of the process. Just like, a little wisp of cloud is the full-fledged hurricane, just in a different stage of its process. Because this is a transcendental process. What it's doing what it's doing, and what it's doing makes absolutely no sense, and there's no way to wrap your head around it. But we can see little vignettes of it in various different phases of its process, some of which are very relatively immature, let's say, at a particular arc of the process and other degrees of maturity. And so we can look at a mature form of expression, let's say, and compare it with an immature form of expression and say, God, that's so wonderful. How do you get there? But they're one and the same thing. It's just arbitrary that you happen to be looking at that arc of the curve instead of this arc of the curve. But what any and all of it is, that's where the money is. What is this? What is this?
Peter, would you say it's a process of greater and greater clarity?
No, that's too heavy-handed. You can't say what it's a process of. You can't say what the process is. It's transcendental. But the process includes every step of its apparent expression, and no stage of its expression is superior to any other stage. So wisdom is not superior to ignorance. Clarity is not superior to murkiness. Murkiness is what clarity looks like at a certain stage of its process. And clarity is what murkiness looks like at a certain stage of its process. And it's pure radiance, beginning, middle, and end. But because of the way it is intrinsically, it seems to work through these processes of little unfoldments. I mean, we experience this as life forms, we experience this as systems, evolving and then deteriorating and disintegrating and becoming the fodder for new systems that evolve out of them. Solar systems, are formed and develop, and the suns explode and the atoms are shot out into space, and then new solar systems are formed. Life forms are, born and grow and age, and then they die, and then new life forms, come out of that. The germs eat your body, and then life proliferates. The circle of life just continues. And of course, looking at it on the point of view of what we think of biologically as life is very myopic. It's energy. What's happening when stars explode is no different.
When you say that the myopia is the fixation on the content of the field of experience.
Yes, exactly so.
So the one does not notice
the thing itself, which cannot be specified, and yet doesn't need specification because it never goes away. Here it is. This is that.
Right, the mind is like a painter, it's projecting or generating a reality on a screen or a canvas.
Well, the mind analyzes hypothetical ways of analyzing the patterns that appear in reality, but the patterns that appear in reality are not mental per se. And they could be said to be mental depending upon, if you say that the ultimate thing is, the ultimate condition is mind, then you could say it's mental. But I think that's a little heavy-handed. To me, it can't be specified what it is. But it needn't be specified what it is, because here it is.
Well, what I meant was the holding of the interpretation of the concept.
Right.
In place or superimposed
right.
over the
Yeah. That's what's confusing. That's what is eluding. When you take those, call them systems of interpretation, worldviews, whatever, systems of analysis, of hypothesis, and forget that they're hypothetical, and hold that they're actual. That's what delusion consists of. They're possible interpretations. It's possible that these are bodies. It's possible that this is space and time. It's possible that there is cause and effect. But those are hypotheses. The actuality is this, and the actuality is actual, is clearly revealed, and completely explicitly transcends the most sophisticated hypotheses you can invest at it. And yet, if you jump to believing the hypotheses are true, then you become like politicians and modern scientists, where you censor what you think. You censor, only the things that you consider to be relevant or actual, you allow to exist, and other experiences which don't fit in, you just ignore them or deny them. There's no global warming. You know, there's no this, there's no that. There's no psychic phenomena. You know, there's no whatever.
Peter, I've been noticing lately that everything just goes to nothing very quickly.
Yeah, instantly.
You know, I mean, because, you know, the mind will try to come up with like a system or a formula or whatever, but actually just looking closely, it's
Yeah.
like bypassing any sort of detour
Yeah.
just to bang.
Yeah, everything completely disappears now, always. And yet, there's never a dearth because there's also continual appearing now. But there's no residue.
It takes a lot of strain off everything.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like there's really nothing to do.
No, of course not. It's doing itself. What a load off.
Peter, last night we went to see this other lady talk, Pamela Miller or something like that. And it was so strange because I feel like the approach that I've taken and the kind of maybe just some of the energies around this group or like the way that you talk about it seems really like direct and intense and like it seems really rewarding to me to be really rough with what's going on here. And the way it was just so funny to see that that other groups of people can be so, I guess, gentle with what's going on. Like there's so much subtlety, but it's hard to like it's hard for me to be gentle with it. I guess it's really such a problem.
Well, you don't need to be gentle with it. Reality is not delicate. It's not precarious. It doesn't. You don't need to tiptoe around it and be dainty with it. You know, you can puke on it and punch it and knock it around, and it will not damage it whatsoever.
Yeah.
You know, and the problem with that kind of approach, the problem with a lot of spirituality, which includes these sorts of, you know, softness or emotionality and this sort of stuff, is it's subtly seductive to human portions of the personality, which is, in my opinion, liable to become a distraction.
Right.
Because what's essential, what's important, is that which is not dependent upon human niceties. Human niceties are all very well and good. If you want to be gentle and be soft and be quiet, have at it. It's a nice way to be. But it has nothing to do with spirituality. And if you think it does, you're liable to confuse yourself. And I think, in my opinion, a lot of spiritual approaches, you know, flirt with that kind of a potential confusion in the way they approach it.
So funny. I guess it must just be because people seem to like that, or just that seems to be the norm or something.
Yeah, well, again, you know, it's kind of monkey see, monkey do. People like to be the way other people are being, and a whole lot of spirituality has been sort of reverential and soft and, you know, sort of. But again, I think that's liable to be misleading. It's liable to be a red herring. It's liable to distract from the essence of the thing. You know, because I'm an efficiency freak, and so I like to try to really point out what's not important, and nothing is important in terms of human functioning, in terms of what you do or don't do as a person. It just is completely irrelevant. It's fine. I mean, it's all very well and good. Do what you like. And by all means be a nice person or not. I mean, whatever you're into, it's absolutely fine, but it has nothing to do with spirituality. Being a good person has absolutely nothing to do with realization. By all means be a good person if you want, or not, depending on your inclination. Be a badass, whatever, right? Who cares? But it has nothing to, you know, but don't confuse that with reality. Don't confuse that with realization. You know, there's a lot of complexity involved because historically, spirituality has been intermixed with government, has been intermixed with social ordering systems, and all of that. And these kinds of systems depend upon controlling people and basically getting them to be conformists. I mean, look at the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages and stuff, you know. It's very manipulative, but even though it may pay lip service or pretend to be related to spirituality, it's actually about the social control systems. And it's very well and good if you can get your population to be docile and polite. Have at it, you know. That's nice social manipulation and social ordering, but it has nothing to do with spirituality. And so, you know, from a point of view of spirituality itself, it can be useful to notice that.
It's really weird. It was funny just to see that, like, I guess from the perspective that I've been experiencing, Which, yeah, is very, like, rough, and reality is just like, it's here, and just to see that there are people that they're still, like, they're exploring this very, like, peaceful aspect of it, and it's just so wild that, like, I guess you can have that, but
Sure.
that's a funny way, like, I haven't experienced anything like that for a while.
Well, it's just liable to be distracting.
Yeah.
Any conditional approach to reality is liable to be distracting because sooner or later circumstances are going to arrive which transcend those conditions. I mean, if being peaceful, if you think that's essential to spirituality, when you find yourself in a condition of not being peaceful, which everyone does sooner or later, you're going to think you're screwed, and you're not. And that's a shame to limit yourself. Peacefulness doesn't inhibit spirituality. Non-peacefulness doesn't inhibit spirituality. Reverentiality doesn't inhibit spirituality. Anger doesn't inhibit the spirituality. It's all mute. It's transparent. It's just irrelevant. And so when you see that, then you're not like going to come down on yourself. Oh no, I'm losing my spirituality. I'm feeling anger. It's just not. No, that's wrong. It's not true. That's inaccurate. It's not actually like that.
Mash up, I guess it's occurring all at once, I guess. So, right, and like all these energies are just popping out. Popping out.
Yeah.
So it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's just reality, right? I mean, shit happens, and shit continues to happen, and that's the essential fact. And that fact is the spiritual fact as well. It's not a problem. It's not like only good shit's supposed to happen, and when bad shit happens, what do we do?
Right.
It's like, no, it's all kinds of weird stuff happens continually, and it's all part of the light show of transcendental reality. And it doesn't inhibit it; on the contrary, it reveals it. It's your golden road, the golden road to the very core of reality is whatever is happening. Is that a hand, Lily? Or are you exercising?
Yes, I'm trying to find it.
I thought maybe it was a rotator cuff exercise.
Yes. Not right now. Okay, let me see. Jeff, put it up for me. Somebody wants to know what the role and power of intent is.
Well, you can explore what the role and power of intent is. The problem with intent is it's partial. So you have an intent, fine, but then how about what you're not intending, or how about what you're intending but you're not wishing you didn't intend? How about in other words, intent again is too partial. It's like talking about focus. Focus is fine, but how about what's out of focus? That's fine too. That's in the mix too. So intent is great, but then, intent is partial, and reality is not partial. And yet reality effortlessly includes all partialities. So reality includes intent, sure. But reality includes unintent too, whatever you qualify the opposite of intent as being. Again, the problem with intent in the spiritual context is it's liable to be related to a specific goal or a specific focus. And nothing in spirituality is partial enough to be specific. The only thing that matters in spirituality is reality itself, and reality itself is already completely inclusive. You don't need to intend it, and if you don't intend it, we're not going to do anything. It's still reality. Intent is personal, and reality is absolutely impersonal. Oh, it's ultimately actually absolutely personal, but the personal is actually absolutely impersonal. So it's all very shady when you try and see it in those terms.
Isn't intent just a tiny little fraction of?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's partial.
But I mean, it's like saying eggs are the world, you know. There's a lot more to the world
Yeah,
than eggs.
yeah. I mean, eggs are the world, but so's everything else. Yeah.
Regardless of what your intent is, if you
Yeah.
intend to be sweet and charming,
Or whatever.
lovely little sunsets,
Yeah.
there's everything else.
Yeah, yeah, and that's all fine too. That's part of it too. But it doesn't exclude anything. There's no hierarchy. There's no better or worse. There's no this versus that. It's just, you know, whatever it can possibly be is an aspect of reality. And so, and by that fact is the holiest of holies. Is the most sacred of sacred. You know, dog shit out on the sidewalk is as good as it gets. I mean, as is, you know, Jesus blessing millions and doing miracles and so on and so forth. But the one is not better than the other. They're the same. The dog shit is Jesus.
It's like offensive or inoffensive. It doesn't matter.
Well, it is, because this is reality. Reality is doing this, and reality is doing that, and reality is doing this, and reality is doing dog shit, and reality is doing wars in the Middle East, and reality is doing stars exploding and galaxies colliding. Reality is doing all that stuff, and it's all equally reality. It's not like this is more or less real, you know, galaxies colliding is more real than this. No, they're the same. This is galaxies colliding, and the galaxies colliding is this cup. They're one and the same. You know, Jesus and dog shit are one and the same. To the extent they exist. It's their existence. They are expressions, they're manifestations of reality. And all manifestations of reality are 100% reality, and reality is it. Reality is what all the hoopla is about. Reality is God. Reality is the sacred. Reality is the shit. As kids say these days. Not just the dog shit, but the shit.
Good shit.
I think that intention has this kind of focused tension to it.
Exactly, yeah. It's a partiality.
It's a lot, yeah. It's a lot.
And so focused tension is fine, but
Yeah.
unfocused and untense, what's that? I mean, it's not like the one is better or worse than the other. They're just different modes.
It's like heavy-handed, like you said. It's like clarity or tension. It's just all these things, stuff to drive you nuts.
Yeah, I mean, it's partializing something which is intrinsically not partial, intrinsically inclusive. And as soon as you play reality off against itself, as soon as you say this is better than that, this is sacred and this isn't, this is useful and this isn't, you're going to drive yourself crazy, literally, because it's not like that. You know, anything whatsoever, any mode of reality is reality, period. You know, so being good is reality, being bad is reality, being focused is reality, spacing out is reality, being healthy is reality, being sick is reality, you know, being born is reality, dying is reality. It's like, it's all good.
Gives you a lot of room to stretch out.
A lot of room, a lot of room. How time's online?
Peter Starkey says, man playing a dog shit saying, I am that.
Truer than you know.
Jeff says, why read I am that when I can read dog shit? It's Jesus.
If you want to read it, you have to write it first.
He does.
Yeah, that's true. There's a whole tradition in Hindu tantrics in India that they're deliberately unsacred. They don't wash and they eat shit and they live in cremation grounds and all of this as a way of celebrating the sacramental fact of the sacredness of everything. And basically thumbing their nose at people who are precious and say, "Oh, this is sacred. This is a sacrament. This is holy." But not that. Don't do that. I mean, that's a desecration. That's if you want to say there's sin, it's to take any portion of reality, which is the divine, and say it's less than divine. I mean, you're going to God and saying it's not divine, and that's if there was what's the word? Sacrilege or whatever, a sin. If there was, whatever. If there was anything that was wrong, that's about as close as you can come. And even that isn't really wrong because that's reality too.
Peter, would that be along the same lines of 5 poisons being just grosser forms of 5 poisons?
Of course. And not even grosser forms, just aspects of. Because again, grosser implies a hierarchy, and no actual grossness can be found that's comparable to some actual subtlety, because both grossness and subtlety are empty. They can't be found. They can't be verified as actually existing as such. So anything that seems to be gross is actually supreme transcendentality. So where's the grossness go in that context? And anything that's subtle is supreme transcendentality. So, when you compare this versus that, you better have an actual this and have actual versus an actual that, or else it's all hot air. And given the fact of emptiness, which applies across the board, all of that kind of argument is just completely invalidated. Because to have a this that's differentiable from a that, there has to be an actual this that can be found to differentiate from an actual that. And you go looking at this, you can't find it, it's empty. You go looking for that, you can't find it, it's empty. It's just an imputation.
In the different yanas of the Hinayana, they work with the effective energies by trying to eradicate them.
Mm-hmm.
In Mahayana, they use countermeasures. I think that's the sequence. And then in Dzogchen, they don't do anything. They let it be what it is, and it's self-liberating.
Yeah, because the nature of what it is liberated. So you don't need to apply liberation or antidotes or purifications or avoidance, because it is already itself the transcendental. So, but you don't. The transcendental doesn't require anything to become the transcendental, and you ultimately, not even ultimately, on any level, cannot find anything other than the transcendental. Try and find something that seems impure on any level whatsoever. Look and see what is actually there, and you will not be able to find anything other than transcendental. And so, in that case, where's the problem? If your starting line is always the goal, you don't need to run the race. It's Miller time. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure being with you. And I'll be here in 2 weeks. And I might even be somewhere else in between.